Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Puranamunina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashaadhyayinim Ambatvam Anusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Namostu te Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pullaravinda Yatapatra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharataila Purnaha Prajvalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraika Panaye Jnanamudraya Krishnaya Gitamrita Duhe Namaha Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogdha Gopalanandanaha Partho Vatsa Sudhir Bhokta Dugdham Gitamratam Mahata Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Thank you all for joining us for the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 15. And we'll be resuming from verse 9 today. Before I go into the Bhagavad Gita, I would like to point out that this Sunday we will be celebrating Krishna Jayanti, which means the birthday of Krishna. So we could say we're going to celebrate Krishna's birthday. We're going to do that by conducting a puja and singing bhajans. Not only here in Chicago, also around the same time in San Ramon also. And on Saturday night, Washington, D.C., East Coast Ashram will be celebrating. But tonight also, we are going to celebrate Lord Krishna's life by paying homage to his teachings. This is given as one of the five, the Pancha Mahayajnas. One of them is to give our homage to the saints of the past. And so that means we do it by studying their teachings. Like Amma, Krishna's every word and action was his teaching. But the Bhagavad Gita is the crown jewel of all of his teachings. It's a teaching that is over 5,000 years old, yet eminently applicable even today, since its source is in the timeless wisdom of the Vedas. So as a review of the chapter, from the very beginning, Krishna has been describing samsara, which means the ocean of birth and death, transmigration. And he's been doing that through the analogy of a tree. And in verses 3 to 5, Krishna talked about how to destroy that tree of samsara, because we don't want to remain in samsara forever. The fact that you're here watching this means that you have a desire to be liberated from all the sufferings of life, at least in some fashion. And Krishna, the way he explains that method is through various sadhanas and spiritual practices. So the first thing he pointed out was the importance of vairagyam, or what we typically call in English like detachment. It's really just means turning away from samsara, turning away from Maya, turning away from the glitter of the phenomenal world, the material world around us. And the second step was turning towards the Atma, turning towards the self, towards Brahman, towards Guru, towards God. That was the second point. The third was bhakti, or devotion. And the fourth was virtues. And he talked about the absence of pride as a virtue and the freedom from delusion, freedom from desires, etc. So those first two, turning away from samsara, turning away from Maya and turning towards spirituality, towards God, towards the self, this is our effort. We have to do that. Nobody else can do that for us. It's an inner process. And bhakti is kind of a recognition. It's, of course, love for God, but also a recognition of the limitations of our effort. You know, just because we make effort doesn't mean that that determines everything. We have to surrender, and he talked about that in the verses that we've seen so far. And then he is pointing out how these virtues that he mentions, they are really the support for all of our actions and sadhana, and they help us avoid creating more karma, which we don't want for sure. And Krishna said that if anybody has the combination of all of these things, that person will achieve the imperishable goal of moksha, or liberation. In the last class, from verse 6, we entered the third section of the chapter, which is the main teaching. And it comprises 13 of the chapter's 20 verses, so that's quite a lot. What is the main teaching of this chapter? It is the oneness of the individual soul and the universal soul, the oneness of the Jivatma and the Paramatma, the oneness of the Creator and creation, which Amma also talks about, and the oneness of everything. When you start, if you take it backwards, the oneness of everything means everything includes the world and everything includes the seeming difference between me and God. So all that gets dissolved and everything is divine. That is where Krishna is going. This is not only the main teaching of this chapter, but also of the entire third section of the Bhagavad Gita, which means chapter 13 to 18. And it is also the essence of the Gita teachings on the whole, as well as the Upanishad teachings, which are the essence of the Vedas. So we're getting the essence of the essence of the essence, right? In other words, this section from verse 6 to 18 of this chapter is a highly distilled version of the ultimate truth of the universe, which human beings have pursued since the beginning of time. And Amma has captured that search beautifully in a song called Kodanu Kodi. And this is how it goes. The tune, I'll just sing one line and then I'll read the meaning to you. It summarizes that eternal quest. Kodanu Kodi Varshangalai Satyame Tedunnu Ninne Manushan Tedunnu Ninne Manushan. O truth eternal, humanity has been searching for you for millions and millions of years. The ancient sages, renouncing everything, performed endless years of austerities in order to make their self flow into your divine stream through meditation. Inaccessible to all, your infinitesimal flame, glowing like the effulgence of the sun, stands still without flickering even in the fiercely blowing cyclone. Flowers, vines, shrine rooms, and temples with newly installed sacred pillars, all are waiting for thee since eons and eons, but still you are inaccessibly distant. You have to listen to Amma sing that and read the words again. So regarding this main teaching, so far Lord Krishna has pointed out that the Param Brahma, or the Supreme Being itself, is what shines in every living being in the form of consciousness. or more technically put, the reflection of consciousness, which we call Chittabhasa. Just like you need the right equipment to receive radio signals, or you need the right substance, like water, to reflect the image of the sun, in the case of consciousness, the medium, the ideal medium is the subtle body, which is primarily the mind, but also includes the energy sheath and the intellectual sheath of our individuality. You may have learned about Pranamaya Kosha and Vijnanamaya Kosha, Manomaya Kosha. These three put together form the subtle body. So it is in that subtle body that consciousness reflects. Krishna also explained how reincarnation takes place, which is a topic of interest to everybody because we've done it many times and we know unless Amma liberates us in this birth, it's going to happen again. So he said that the body gets left behind and the reflection of consciousness is what travels. The Chittabhasa is what travels from body to body, along with the mind and the prarabdha karma. The karma that we carry, that's in our causal body. And through this explanation, Krishna is also showing us that it is that reflection, that Chittabhasa, that gives life to the body. Without that, it would just be a pile of mud. So I'll give you an example. The body that I received this time around is about 160 pounds, which means it is comprised of about 104 pounds of oxygen, 30 pounds of carbon, 15 pounds of hydrogen, 5 pounds of nitrogen, 2.5 pounds of calcium, and about 3.5 pounds of another 14 different elements. Now, if you go out into the farm field that we have here, I'm pretty sure you could probably dig up the same elements in the same proportions, and then you can mix them up in a big container, right? And then let's say that science figures out how to recreate the physical body from those elements with all the organs. You tell me, is that going to start walking and talking? Will the mixture of the elements start singing bhajans and talk about the Bhagavad Gita? I don't think so. One part of the recipe is missing. Very important part, and that missing element is the Chittabhasa. The fact that this body is not just a pile of mud right this second is a testament to the presence of a sentient principle that is beyond. Because it's never been detected. What is it? They're still debating it. So from verse 9 to 11, this topic of the oneness of the Supreme Soul and the individual soul is going to be continuing. So we will resume from verse 9. And last time I received a request to not only chant it in parts, but also after we've done it in parts, to do it all together so that we can get the flow of each verse. It's also a good idea for this chapter because this is the chapter that we chant entirely before meals in Amrita Puri. Srotran chakshu sparshanancha rasanam ghranameva adhishtaya manaschayam vishayan upasevate. Now let's chant the whole verse together. Srotran chakshus sparshanancha rasanam ghranam evacha adhishtaya manaschayam vishayan upasevate. Presiding over the ear and eye, the sense of touch, taste, and smell, as well as the mind, this one, and then in parentheses, the Jivatma, enjoys the objects. So last week in the previous verse, this is what Krishna said. Just as the wind carries the scent of flowers, in parentheses, the embodied Lord carries the five senses and the mind from whichever body it departs to whichever body it acquires. Now, this 9th verse explains what happens after the Jiva acquires that new body. It's the next part of the story. So you could say that it starts its shop, sets up shop and it starts doing its business of acting and enjoying. These are the basic components of samsara. You do something and you get the benefit. Or it's not always a benefit. You do and you get the results. The results are both physical and karmic outcome. And the physical outcome typically comes faster. Like if you touch fire, it hurts right away, not tomorrow. But the karmic outcome is different. Let's say you do something nice for somebody. You might not get the karmic fruit of that for a long time. Who knows? But so that's why it is said that, in the Gita also that worldly people or materialistic thinking people go for karma because the results come faster. And the type of body that this jiva, this individual soul, receives is determined by karma, naturally. And that is also in line with what Krishna said in chapter 8, verse 6. Whatever entity one remembers when leaving the body at the end, that very entity one reaches being absorbed in that thought. So that might sound like a contradiction. You just said that it's karma, and now you're saying it's what the person thinks about at the end of their life. Well, at the end of our life, we will remember the most important thing to us, and that is determined by our actions, the thoughts, words, and physical actions that we have had through our whole lifetime. All of the sources of our karma, the activity, mental activity is included, right? So that comes together and that forms the last thought. That's why we say, my whole life flashed before my eyes when I almost died. So we know that that's momentum that we're creating ourselves. And that, combined with the next karmic homework assignment, let's call it, that determines where, when, and what kind of body we receive. So once a devotee asked Amma, what is this prarabdha karma? Prarabdha karma, technically speaking, is the burden of karma that we have to experience in whatever birth we're in right now. It's not what we finished last time. It's not what we're going to do next time. It's this present homework assignment. So he's saying, what is that? What does that mean? And Amma gave a beautiful explanation, not surprisingly. Daughter, prarabdha karma is nothing other than the vasanas that exist in the chitta, which is the memory faculty of the subtle body. Prarabdha will be there as long as body consciousness continues. But it effectively ceases to exist upon self-knowledge. Effectively means the body will go through it, right? Prarabdha is related to the physical and subtle bodies. So once you realize you're not those, it doesn't affect you anymore, right? Once we relinquish identification of these two, prarabdha will be finished. It will fall away when we gain the knowledge, I am not the body, I am the self. My children might find life with Amma difficult. They might experience challenges and hardships. But when you have a little trouble, don't think, I'll go somewhere else and do sadhana there. My children do not understand how Mahatmas work. Amma is conducting an operation within you. Many things have to be removed, and my children may feel pain. Amma operates from inside her children, removing the tumors within. It's like so perfect for people because everybody will feel like this at one point. I'm just going to go somewhere else. However, you feel only the pain and difficulty and think of running away, not realizing the great service the Guru is rendering to you. It's very rare to find her saying something so blunt. If you run away from Amma, the loss is yours. Amma is exhausting your prarabdhas Amma is exhausting your prarabdha karma from 100 births in one birth. If you go away from Amma, even if you take 1,000 births, you may not attain self-realization. You must understand this. If you live in the presence of the Guru, attenuation or reduction of the vasanas will be very swift. So if you had any of those predilections in your mind, this is a preemptive response to you, not from me, from Amma. And all the equipment mentioned in this verse, the senses and the mind, is needed for that prarabdha karma to be exhausted. You can't come in and just say, I don't need this and that. I mean, people who have the switch of one of the sense organs turned off, that's also a lesson. Or Amma's freeing them from, the hassle of that sense organ. Sometimes when I see dogs walking around sniffing every single thing in the universe, I'm glad I don't have such a strong smelling capacity, because I would be distracted by so many more things. So having less sensory stimuli is sometimes better, helps us focus. And remember, when we're talking about organs, sense organs, we're not talking about the physical one, not these. We're talking about the faculty of perception, which is subtle and invisible to the eye. And I don't even know if modern science understands that. Amma says, and actually all of the Indian spirituality says that the real organ is something invisible. Because you can have all these ears and eyes and nose, and it can also not work. So only those faculties are carried by the chittabhasa, the subtle body, not the physical organs, obviously. And when the subtle body goes, that means all of our vasanas, all of our negative tendencies come with us too. Sorry. You don't get to escape from them. There's no escape from our vasanas, which is why Amma always tells people that suicide is not a solution. You're just going to be the same body, same subtle body, mind, just in a different box, the box of the body. And how long does this continue? For as long as we need to be in that body. Maybe there's a one-day homework assignment, and that might even be inside of the mother's tummy. Or there may be one day outside of the tummy, and that's all they needed to move on to the next teaching. Or maybe 100 years, and everything in between. The point is that once we finish learning all we can in this body, we go to another body to learn the next lessons. And let's learn the next lesson of this chapter from Krishna in verse 10. Utkramantam stitam vapi bunjanam vagunanvidam vimudha nanupashyanti pashyanti jnana chakshushaha. And together. Utkramantam stitam vapi bunjanam vagunanvidam vimudha nanupashyanti pashyanti jnana chakshushaha. The deluded, or we could say ignorant, do not perceive the self who departs, stays, and experiences, parentheses, objects of the senses, through association with the gunas. I've changed it quite a bit, as you can see. But in parentheses, those who have the eye of wisdom see it or realize it. So it's a quite different translation. I'll read it one more time without mentioning parentheses. The deluded do not perceive the self who departs, stays, and experiences objects of the senses through association with the Gunas. But those who have the eye of wisdom see. Or we could say realize it. That's what it really means. A very similar verse comes in Shankaracharya's Atma Bodha. A very similar verse comes in Shankaracharya's Atma Bodha, verse 65. This is how it goes. You'll see that it's quite similar. The Atma, which is all-pervading existence consciousness, is seen by one who has the eye of wisdom. One whose vision is obscured by ignorance does not perceive it, just as a blind person does not see the shining sun. Now remember, Shankaracharya, his time was far thousands of years later than Krishna. So Krishna's not copying Shankaracharya, okay? So this verse shows us why Krishna has been discussing the topic of birth, death, and reincarnation. It's not just for fun. It's to point out the importance of wisdom, of jnana, of spiritual knowledge. And that acts as an eye, as it were, as an eye in quotes. That enables us to see the subtle truth of the Chitabhasa's existence, the soul. The Chitabhasa is the one who experiences everything in life, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And no matter what it is, that is what we know as life, that reflection of consciousness. Every breath of ours depends on that jiva, on that Chitabhasa, the individual soul. But that Chitabhasa depends on chit, consciousness, which is the Paramatma. So in a very, very real sense, every moment of our life is simply the grace of the Paramatman. In the Gita, Krishna is the symbol for the Paramatma. For us, Amma is the symbol of Paramatma. So when we see this beautiful form, we can remember the Amma that we love, that we adore, but we should also remember she is a symbol of something that we have yet to experience, but that is the Amma that she wants us to experience. You may have heard her say, this body is not the real Amma and all that, so that's her point. But for the time being, unless she makes us, bond to her with love, then she can't take us to the next level. So first she has to create that Guru Shishya, or the Guru-disciple relationship. Then she can pull us, even against our will, farther down the path to God realization. And even though these teachings have been around for thousands and thousands of years, people still question the existence of a higher power. Then he's going to explain why they do that and why they have that, they don't have the capacity to understand. But for us, just to understand how Amma responds to such doubting people, all we have to do is read the opening conversation of Awakened Children, Volume 1. A student asked Amma, "It is said that God exists, but I am unable to believe that." Now you should know that Kerala has a very high literacy rate, but at the same time it's very hyper-intellectual, and there's a lot of what you would probably call, atheists kind of there. Not that we would dislike atheists, but the point is that they're questioning, Amma has to get them beyond that doubting mind before she can actually teach them something. So the students are the ones who are exposed to that the most. And so when they come, they always used to ask questions like this. Now, Amma has her own students, 100,000 of them, and they all love Amma. But this is, in the late 70s. Amma said, "Son, to say that there is no God is like using your own tongue to say, 'I have no tongue.' Is it possible for a tongueless person to say, 'I have no tongue'? No. Likewise, when we say there is no God, at that moment we prove that God is. Truth is only one. That is God, which is existence itself. Her point is that just by talking, you are affirming your existence. So you can't say, I don't exist. On another occasion, somebody said, is there a God? And then Amma said, who wants to know? And he said, I do. And she goes, okay, you just proved it. The one who wants to know, that's God. And then Amma went on, actually. Son, is your father still alive? Yes. What about your father's father, your grandfather? No, he died long before I was born. Do any grandchildren call their father a bastard because they have not seen their grandfather? Son, do you remember who gave birth to you? When you grew a little older, everyone told you, this is your mother. And you believed it, even though you did not actually see the person when they gave birth to you. It's impossible, right? Often, it is blind faith that leads us to the goal. Son, this morning you left your house and got into the bus that comes here. Isn't it because of your faith that you will reach the destination? You got into the bus even though you didn't know the driver or whether the vehicle is properly maintained. Wasn't your expectation that you would reach here simply blind faith? And he didn't say, you're right. He asked another question. Amma, how can we see God? And she said, son, our mind is very dim. It has no subtlety. Having searched with our external eyes, do not say, I can't see God, so I don't believe in God. See, that argument it means that we only accept what we can verify through sensory perception. That means that atoms don't exist. That means electrons don't exist. Okay, we have microscopes. Okay, but what about things that black hole and everything? We can't see it. We can't perceive it. It's just an inference. So the Charvakas, or the materialists of the ancient times, wouldn't accept anything that they could not perceive. And Amma saying, don't be like that. We should not make a big fuss saying, I will only believe in the things that I see. Search. Certainly you will find it. Without God's grace, we cannot see Him. If we want to get His grace, the ego should go. We think we are great, but even to move a finger, we need God's power. All grace will flow to us if we cultivate an attitude of humility. But God will not abide where there's ego. Can you imagine? This is decades ago, and Amma's just sitting in the sand in Amrita Puri, and you could just walk up and just start having a chat with her like that. So, as the verse says, the wise can perceive the presence of God, or we can call it just the Jiva, the reflection of consciousness, but deluded and ignorant people cannot. And that's why they doubt. Actually, it should be obvious when the Jivatma departs from the body. Yesterday his body was really active, and today not moving at all. Actually, he's as still as a stone. That should make it very clear that some mysterious power, which was there yesterday, is now gone. And Krishna says, through association with the Gunas. What does that mean? Gunas means the qualities, right? Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. The Jivatma has a perceived association, right? He says association, but what he really means is it's perceived. We went through this in chapter 13 and 14. Krishna had to explain it over and over. It's these, it's a perceived connection with the three gunas, the sattva, rajas, and tamas, because of the ignorance that makes us identify with the physical and subtle bodies. So someone says, what's your favorite food? And you go, oh, my favorite food is this. So you're identifying with whatever that is. Avocados or something. Chinese food, Indian food, whatever. And, actually, where are you? I'm right here, I'm in the satsang hall. Then I'm identifying with the physical body. So that is the kind of association we have with these gunas. I'm here, I'm not there, I'm this height, I look like this, I was born here, such and so. So this both the physical and subtle bodies are made up of the gunas, the trigunatmika Maya. Maya is made up of the three gunas. So this body is part of Maya. So when we identify with that, then we can say that the Jivatma, or the individual soul, has attributes, as it were. There is no attributes for consciousness, but we're talking about consciousness reflected in the subtle body for a deluded person who has not realized his or her true being. And when you remove that attachment to an identification with the physical and subtle bodies, what happens? That very same Jivatma realizes its oneness with the Paramatma and becomes free from all these attributes. Now, why does one want to be free from attributes? I kind of like my body. I kind of like this face that I have, or something like that. Well, the problem is that it is those attributes that we cling to that also create sorrow. Because it's not just the ones that we like. All the ones that we don't like about life are also the attributes, the gunas, and we have to contend with that. And in childhood, as a baby, we cry all the time, and in old age we cry or we suffer. In between we suffer also. So it's not what it's made up to be. Attributes are overrated. He says the deluded, right? So when it is so obvious that a living entity is present, those who fail to perceive it or who reject it or question it can only be, well, vimurda. And in Sanskrit that can be translated as confused, dull, ignorant, and so on. And Krishna emphasizes the point by calling them vimurdha. Murdha itself means fool. But vimurda means like extra fool or double fool or whatever it is. It's a prefix that serves to intensify the idea that comes after it. And they don't even try to understand, even though there are ample scriptures and wise people to educate them. This is basically a description of those who live only for materialistic pleasure, which we learn from Shankaracharya's commentary. He says, "The deluded fools fail to perceive it, for their minds are distracted in the grip of varied objective experiences." And then he shows the other side. Those who have the eye of wisdom, which is jnana chakshushu. It's not just the title of a book that Swami Ramakrishnananda wrote. It's a commonly used term in the scriptures. Those who have the eye of wisdom realize it or see it. In the verse it says see, but it means see with like a capital S. That eye of wisdom is often referred to also as the third eye. And that is symbolically drawn on the forehead in the location of the Agnya Chakra. Agnya Chakra is actually in the middle of these two lines. So in the middle of the head. So, but here it's the trigger point on the forehead. So that's why we call this the Agnya Chakra. Just the closest you can get to it with your finger. And it is also considered to be the eye of understanding and seeing things correctly, even subtle things, like the Chittabhasa, the subtle body. It is said that in the course of our lifetime, we may meet about 80,000 people. With the physical eye, we may see 80,000 bodies. But with the eye of wisdom, we can understand these 80,000 people are only temporarily trapped in the body due to identification. And I know that they are not the body, they are the one and only Paramatman, and I am also. Fortunately, he moves on and he tells us how we acquire that eye of wisdom as well. Actually, it's Shankaracharya's commentary that tells us. It is yielded by the right means of knowledge. And those are It is yielded by the right means of knowledge. Those who have that eye of wisdom, yielded by the right means of knowledge, are clear-eyed and do see the Jiva. Clear-eyed, I like that concept. It means that when you let go of all of our attachments, our vision becomes clear. Then we don't need glasses anymore. Spiritual glasses. And those right means that he's talking about are precisely what we're doing here. We're trying to understand our Guru's teachings in the light of the Gita and her own words. And let us continue to verse 11. Yatanto yoginaschainam pasyantyatmanyavastitam yatanto prakritatmano nainam pasyantyachetasaha. And together. Yatanto yoginaschainam pasyantyatmanyavastitam yatanto pyakritatmano nainam pasyantyachetasaha. The yogis, striving for perfection, behold him dwelling in their heart. But the impure and unwise, even though striving, see him not. I don't think I changed anything here. So Krishna's now giving us another scenario. It's no longer a comparison of the deluded and the wise, but rather a comparison of those who have the requisite degree of inner purification and discernment, and those who don't have that. Again, Shankaracharya's commentary is very helpful, so I'll share that. Striving hard, such yogins with concentrated minds see the Jiva, knowing, I am the self. This perception occurs in the inner self, the intellect. So here he's referring to the self as the intellect. That word Atma in the Gita is used in many different ways. Sometimes it is used to mean the intellect. And Jnanadev has some wonderful things to share here that I like to share here. Right-thinking people discern that the soul ever abides on its own, while the bodily functions abide in the body. It's a very clear demarcation. Isn't that nice? The body's got its deal. All right, that's the body. But the Atma, that me, I'm not that. It's just like Moses parting the ocean. Okay, body over here, soul over here. Later on, we're going to hear a little different story, but for those of us who are struggling to detach from the body, it's a nice concept. Such people's vision is not veiled due to their having attained knowledge, their awakened mind being firmly fixed in the Supreme Self, and their discernment having spread out like the scorching rays of the summer sun. Only such people of knowledge view the soul in this light. The star-packed sky is reflected in the sea, but it is obvious that it has not actually broken and collapsed into the sea. The sky remains in the sky itself, its semblance in the sea being unreal. In that way, the encasement of the soul in the body is also a mere appearance. The knowing ones view me as I am, even as the body comes into existence or ceases to exist. That clarifies a lot. And what does Krishna mean by yogis, right? Because that word yogi also is used in many different ways. It means here that these people have acquired what is called sadhana, chatushtaya, We've talked about that numerous times. You'll have to fish up that video, or if you request it, maybe we can put it on the YouTube for this ashram. We'd have to find that video. But there were some classes we talked about it in depth. So he's talking about people who have attained those qualities through karma yoga and bhakti, or in a broader sense, upasana. And he says they behold him dwelling in their heart. And that means as the Paramatma. Doesn't mean like you're just seeing a form, like Krishna's form, or not even just Amma's form. It should be that we're viewing inside as the Paramatman, the Supreme Being. And that Paramatma, and we are aware that that Paramatma is what is abiding inside of our subtle body. It is not something separate from us. They recognize the Paramatma as I am. And that is a factual experience for them, direct experience. Now, what does striving for perfection mean? First of all, it means that it doesn't happen just like that one fine day. Some people think that, they just went out and looked at the stars and it was like, oh, I got realization or something like that. There has to be some effort to detach ourselves from the body and mind, because we've lived identifying with them for, who knows, countless births. It doesn't just fall away automatically. Remember, Amma says Ramana Maharshi is an exception to the rule, and she says that he did so much sadhana and made so much effort in previous lifetimes. So pointing to him and say, I'm going to do what he did, that's just lazy man's talk. So we have to make effort. I'll tell you what my silly version was of that in college. I somehow got interested in it. I think I took a class, Indo-Tibetan Buddhist tradition or something. No, actually it was introduction to Asian studies. And then they showed me we read the Tao Te Ching, and we read the Bhagavad Gita, not the whole thing, but and I got inspired. So I started meditating, quote unquote meditating. You know what I did? I changed the light bulbs in my study lamp. From a regular one, I turned it to a blue light bulb. I turned off all the other lights. Turned on the blue lamp, and then I lit an incense stick, and I watched the smoke go like this. It turned blue. That was my meditation. Isn't that profound? Later on, I had another way of developing detachment when I was living in Japan. It wasn't a very traditional one. I guess it helped to some degree, but I wouldn't recommend it to other people. I used to jump off waterfalls like 30, 40 feet just because I was afraid and I wanted to get over fear. And so I would just jump off them and climb up anyhow, that's another lifetime. Don't try that at home. Anyhow, these are not the traditional methods, right? There's easier and more direct ways of doing it, but you need to do it under the guidance of a guru. So that is basically karma yoga and bhakti yoga. We have to do all these things. You don't go, skydiving to do these things. And that is why Amma encourages people to inculcate the right culture and values in children at an early age, because then they're on the right track from the beginning. They'll get a head start just from their family atmosphere. And now that means that the parents have to practice it also. So here in the ashram, we have a lot of parents who are showing, setting a nice example for the children. So like that, if you can do that, even wherever you may be, that would be wonderful. And just never say, do what I say, not what I do. Right? That is a horrendous missile to unleash on children. And we can never imagine. Can you imagine Amma saying that? Don't do what I do what I say. It's like the very last thing you would ever hear her say. Just look at those superstar kids in Amrita Puri. They're all products of the ashram atmosphere and Amma's divine presence there. This morning you might have heard Niranjan. If you're not watching, you should. It's really nice. He was saying so innocently, Amma, you're my birth mother, and you're Ambuti Amma, but you're my birth mother. And then this one, he's pointing to his birth mother. He said, she's just my elder sister. And Amma laughed so hard. And then he argued with him, and finally Amma said, okay, fine, you're right. He says, you have to be the one who gave birth to me. He was so emphatic. It was cute. And even the Amma kids in USA who didn't have that opportunity to be locked in Amritapuri with Amma for a year and a half, now they're all grown up and doing so many amazing things. And it's all from the virtues they imbibed from her. Now on the other side of the equation, we have the impure and unwise. And they do not see the Paramatma, in other words. Shankaracharya says, there are others who, having not mastered the mind or purified it by means of tapas and sadhana, tapas is austerity, sadhana is spiritual practice, and having not desisted from bad conduct and remain proud by nature, they do not see the self, even though striving hard, employing the means of knowledge. They are the undiscerning. Now it seems strange. Someone who hasn't purified and hasn't mastered their mind, hasn't purified it, they haven't done any tapas or sadhana, they haven't desisted from bad conduct and they're proud. What kind of person is going to strive hard and employ the means of knowledge? Well, an example would be Ravana. Ravana, he knew all the scriptures. He knew puja. He was a Brahman. He did all these, sadhanas actually. But for the wrong reason. He was very arrogant and he just wanted to kill Rama. At one point, that was his only prayer. Before that, he had other prayers before, and then after the kidnapping Sita, he was just thinking about killing Rama all the time. So we have such people in this world, and actually you don't have to go to the extreme of Ravana. You just, there are people who've been meditating for a long time and are very proud of it. Someone who studied the scriptures and will tell you how much they know about the scriptures, like that. It shows that they're not getting the benefit from it. So from this description, we can still call this latter kind of person a seeker of sorts. We have to give them the credit. They're meditating, maybe doing some tapas or whatever it is. The problem is that they have not prepared themselves enough. And not preparation in the terms of just reading scriptures or something like that, but in the form of inner purification. And also in the form of cultivating a subtle inward-looking power of discernment. Now, so that inward-looking discernment is different from external, like intellectual analysis. You may be a very educated scientist, but still maybe you can't get rid of an addiction to something that let's say you want to get rid of it, but you can't. You just don't have that inward-looking mentality. So then you might not be able to do it, even though you may want to. So like that viveka buddhi is what we're talking about, a subtle and inward-looking power of discernment. That is what is missing in such people, along with the inner purity. But the inner purity, we're going to talk about that. It's not like the puritanical type that we might think of. So the former people he was talking about, in a positive way, they are those who have acquired the requisite amount of inner purification through all those means that Shankaracharya mentions. And most importantly, through the Guru's grace and through the Guru's teachings. Some people think that they can get God realization. I don't need a Guru. The Guru's just going to try to make me his or her servant. I don't want that. I'm the Brahman myself, like that. So don't worry. It's not so cut and dry. It's more like a progression. So as and when we purify ourselves internally more and more, to that degree we can perceive the self in subtler and subtler levels. And we're all on that same path, just because I'm talking about it, don't think that I'm, finished. That would be the scariest thing to say. Amma would immediately show us that we're nowhere near finished. So basically, this verse conveys a very clear message that preparation is everything, which is true of anything in the world, really. Imagine trying to learn calculus without even having learned algebra, or trying to learn trigonometry without learning geometry. We need those preparations for the next step. So for one who has mastered calculus, algebra and geometry are a snap, right? So a prepared mind can understand and imbibe the subject matter without any struggle. That's the point. And an unprepared mind will not understand anything and find it very boring. That's why some people tell me that Bhagavad Gita is so boring, I can't stand it. Upanishads are so boring. It's not, we shouldn't judge anybody for that, because there's a lot of subjects that I probably don't find very exciting, but that's my lack of preparedness. So I admit that. So we should, as long as we admit that it's not exciting because I'm not properly prepared, it's okay. But he calls them unwise. Why go to that extreme, right? Because that power of discernment, the proper discernment that we need, requires a degree of freedom from desires. Why? Because our likes and dislikes make some important things seem unimportant, and some unimportant things seem really urgent. I'll tell you a little story. A man didn't like wearing glasses, and he picks up his cell phone, kind of squints at it, and he says, "Honey, I think I'm fine. Do you really think I need glasses?" And the wife says, "Well, considering that you're about to try to make a phone call with the TV remote, I would say yes, you do." So the dislike of wearing glasses makes an urgent situation seem trifle. This is how desires distort our vision and hence our discernment. A reduction in desires is what is meant by purity. It doesn't mean the puritanical thing like, oh, that person's like that, oh, he's evil, I'm pure, I'm an angel, like that. It is just trying to reduce our desires, that's all it is. In other words, discernment or viveka comes along with that kind of inner purification. And where purity is lacking, so too discernment will also be lacking. And inner purity, as we saw earlier in the previous chapter, was that is sattva. And sattva is the ideal condition needed for a subtle intellect to develop. What about rajas? What is it the ideal condition for? If you remember from chapter 14, it's ideal for increasing desires. So if you want to farm desires, you can just be very rajasic. And we should also understand that discernment will be inversely proportionate to the amount of desire. So as desires increase, the discernment goes down. Or as discernment increases, that means that the desires are going down. So that's why he says, even though they strive, they haven't prepared themselves properly, so their desires compromise the intellect's ability to grasp the subtle truths of spirituality. And then as a result, they can't perceive the jivatma, that the individual soul, even though they may study the scriptures and practice meditation, etc. Don't worry, it doesn't mean forever. It's not like you're condemned eternally. Because today's unprepared seeker is tomorrow's well-prepared seeker. But don't take that as an excuse to stop trying. I remember a long time ago there was a comedian in America who said, "In school they taught me that practice makes perfect, and then they told me that nobody's perfect, so I stopped practicing." This is the lazy man's way. Many people in Amritapuri also struggled initially, then gradually change in Amma's presence and through the regimen of sadhana that she mandates there. You just listen to all the experiences, the experience talks every day. There was one brahmacharini a few days ago, she said that her father said, "You can join the ashram only after I die." You know, and then that father met Amma, and he was like a baby, started crying, and he became a devotee also. So Amma can change anybody's heart. One more recent modern day commentator has said that without refining the mind and intellect, our efforts will be wrongly placed. That's a nice way of thinking about it. You know, you're making an effort, you're just doing it in the wrong way. Due to a lack of self-control, we will get on a tangent that like tickles our ego or tickles our intellect. And the result is that instead of making the mind and intellect more subtle, we only make the ego more subtle. It becomes the spiritual ego, which is even harder to uproot than the blatant one. And until we pull out of that treacherous tailspin, we will not develop that eye of wisdom. Amma shows us the ideal example of the striving yogi. She does it with her life, even though she doesn't need to. It's just a show, really. Show means, in the sense, to inspire us. She could just sit in a tree and be in bliss all the time. She doesn't need to do this for us. And she is ever engaged in the welfare of humanity with all humility. Humility is the word. She does all kinds of work to perfection, the most minute detail, because she views it as a service to the world. And that means her version of God is this visible world. Serving the world is serving God. She's always exemplary in her austerity and self-control. Like you've seen, she forces herself to put her right leg on top of her left leg. She doesn't have to do that. She could just relax, but she's doing it. This is how you're supposed to sit, because you get a straight spine. That's why she's doing it. Otherwise, people would say, Amma doesn't do it, so I don't have to do it. She knows that. That's why she's, even though her knee is, having pain. So this is so that we will follow her and acquire the inner purity. That's what her goal is, not just to have us sit in that posture. She wants us to advance on the spiritual path. Now, Jnanadev has a nice bit of commentary here. The body becomes feeble through exhaustion due to over-enjoyment, then becomes still, in other words, dead, and people loudly lament that the soul has gone. Now he's going to ridicule such people because they shouldn't be lamenting. Would it be right to believe that the wind is blowing only if the tree leaves are fluttering? And to say that there's no wind because the tree is not swaying? With a mirror placed in front, one sees his appearance reflected in it. Is it right to suppose that the appearance came into existence only then and did not exist before? Similarly, with the removal of the mirror, one's reflection naturally disappears. Is it to be deduced from this that the original thing has ceased to exist? The point is, through illusion, the body's coming into being and departing is unjustly imposed by the ignorant one on the attributeless soul. One may secure knowledge, possess keen intellect, or be thoroughly versed in all sciences, yet lacking in self-discipline, he would not be able to attain me, the omnipresent one. Now, this is a very emphatic statement he's going to say, so I'll give it that emphasis, but don't get really shocked. One may talk volumes of reason, yet if the sense objects have taken complete hold of his heart, he will, I affirm, emphatically, never attain me, never attain me, never attain me. He says it 3 times. Would the structure of one's words in a dream ever help to disentangle the entanglement of worldly existence? Does touching a book amount to reading it? Could anybody blindfolded appraise the worth of a set of pearls merely by smelling them? In that way, One cannot attain me even after 10 million lifetimes simply by mechanically repeating various scriptures with a heart full of egotism. This is exactly in line with Amma said before, verse 9 from the, what was it? The Upanishad. I'm missing it. I'm forgetting it. Huh? Ishavasya Upanishad. And now that moved on to Bhaja Govindam. But the idea is the same. Just by mechanically repeating, parroting them, and you're going to be egoistic, and then you're not going to get anywhere spiritually. So this 11th verse concludes the topic of seeing the unity of the Paramatma, the Supreme Soul, and the Jivatma, the individual soul. That began from verse 6, when Krishna said, "The sun illuminates that not, nor fire or the moon. That is my supreme abode, going where they never return." So these 6 verses serve to show that there is no distance. He says, going where they never return, but actually there's no distance. It is only as though we are reaching the Paramatman, like remembering the key was in your pocket the whole time and you say, "Oh, I got the key." It was always there. I always had the key. Here too, we realize that we have always been one with Brahman. There are 6 more verses on the main teaching in this chapter. And the next topic is going to be Brahman Jagat Aikyam, the oneness of Brahman, the Supreme Being, and the world. So this is now very akin to Amma's vision. She's always telling us that this whole world is God's visible form. This is going to continue up to verse 15. Let us chant verse 12. Yadaditya gadam tejo jagadbhasayate khilam yat chandramasi yat chagnau tat tejo vidhi mamakam. Together. Yadaditya gadam tejo jagad bhasayate khilam yat chandramasi yat chagnau tat tejo vidhi mamakam. The light in the sun that illumines the entire universe, which shines in the moon and the fire, know that light to be mine. Just some minor corrections or changes. Fortunately, somebody has asked Amma this same question. Amma, it is said that Brahman and Jagat, means the Supreme Being, and the world are one. How can that be? Amma's response, I just have to share it with you. Just as every object that exists has a name, this world exists in Brahman. So she's saying that, putting it like this world is in Brahman, but in this chapter, when Krishna describes it, he says that this world exists because of Brahman. Brahman is the mula, or the root. 2 different ways of saying it, same point. Name and form are inseparable. When there is the awareness of the world, there is no awareness of the self. And when there is awareness of the self, awareness of the world disappears. And then she gives this beautiful example of the butter in milk that helps us understand the kind of the oneness of the formless and the form. There's butter in milk, but it is not visible. When butter is obtained through churning the milk, that churning is actually an analogy for doing sadhana. Through churning the milk, it forms a ball. I don't think many of us have churned milk, so this is kind of in a traditional society he's talking about. If heated, it melts and the shape changes. It melts. I mean, it becomes liquid. In the same manner, Brahman, the Supreme Being, is not seen in diversity. It can be found when sadhana is performed. When butter is heated, there is no form. When cooled down, it solidifies. God's form and formlessness are like this. So to me, this reminded me of a concept that I'm not an expert in at all, but it's the concept of like quarks. And to me, it's like, I confirmed this just to be sure, but the idea is that at a certain energy level, everything becomes formless, even according to science. But as the energy level reduces, the basic building blocks of the universe solidify or coagulate, however you want to put it, in lay people's terms. So it's similar, because I'm us talking about how heating it up at a high energy level, there is no form. At a low, what we're seeing is like the lowest of the low in forms. Even according to the creation theory that comes up in the scriptures. Because remember, the sattva portion of these elements goes to create, one thing. I won't go into the details. The subtle body, the subtle aspect of the rajas goes to creating like the organs of action, etc. And the tamas version of all the 5 elements is went to create this physical world. So we got the dregs. This body is the dregs. The world is the dregs. But you could also say it's the lowest energy level. So that's why we can perceive it, because you cannot perceive the mind, etc. So from verse 12 to 15, Krishna is going to say, basically, the Paramatma has taken the form of everything in this creation. So first he was talking about how it's one with the individual soul. Now it's that the Paramatman is one with this whole world. You put the 2 together and there's nothing left. So the conclusion is that there is no world other than the Paramatma. There's nothing other than the Paramatma, which is pure Advaita Vedanta. There's a verse in the Chandogya Upanishad, 3.14.1. All this is Brahman. Everything comes from Brahman. Everything goes back to Brahman. And everything is sustained by Brahman. So this is what is meant by this concept that's going to come in the next part of the main teaching, which is Sarvatma Bhava. Everything is the Atma. It's the knowledge that all is Paramatman and there is nothing else. And to convey that same concept, actually it's the same concept that comes in Purnamada, right? Purnamada, Purnamidam means the same thing as that quote from the Chandogya Upanishad. And to convey that concept, Krishna is going to use a particular method where he enumerates a few important things and he says, they are nothing but me, or mine. He starts off with the light of the sun because, well, for the solar system, the sun is about as important as you get. It's the only reason why we're all here. And that's why he says the light in the sun that illumines the entire universe, know that light to be mine. Jagat actually can mean both universe and world. So we know that it doesn't illuminate outside of the solar system. There are other stars elsewhere. But, so as far as we only know the solar system, so experientially. And this is actually why the daily Sandhya Vandanam that some people do, not just Brahmins, a lot of people do it these days. The light of the sun is mentioned. It is worshipped in the form of the Gayatri Mantra. You may have heard that, Om Bhurbhuvaswa Tat Saviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Na Prachodayad. That's from the Rig Veda. In the English translation, there are many translations of it. I'll go with this. We meditate on the effulgent glory of the divine. May that enlighten our understanding. It's assumed that it's referring to the sun. The sun not only illumines the solar system, but it sustains it with heat, light, and energy, without which, of course, this would just be a bunch of rocks. And Amma repeatedly reminds us that we need sunlight for vitamin D and other health benefits. I mean, there's a long list of all the things that sunlight is good for. And I just learned by going over this verse again that, exposure to the ultraviolet B radiation in the sun's rays causes a person's skin to create vitamin D. So for some reason, Caucasian people, maybe because they have less skin pigment, they create more vitamin D when they're exposed to the sun. So 1 hour outside for me, if I was wearing a bathing suit, I guess, I would get 100,000 IUs of vitamin D. That's worth a lot, actually. So it's just we can't sell it and make money off of it. It's also supposed to be good for different types of cancer, in limited amounts, of course, and also many skin conditions. So all of this is included in that concept of illumine. And then he says it shines in the moon and the fire also, and which is natural because the light of the moon is simply from the sun, and the light or the shine of the fire, well, that comes from, in the old days, it came from wood. And where does wood get it from? It's just absorbing the sunlight, and that's how it creates its wood. And the wood contains the fire. So everything belongs to the sun, and the light of the sun, he says, is mine. He's not being egotistic. He's talking as the Paramatma. So we have to understand, when Krishna says mine, it's not an egoistic statement. There's also an additional layer of meaning in this verse, because the sun is also a symbol for the self, like in astrology. So it's a symbol for that, and when we think about the sun's light, the light that comes from the sun is the light of consciousness. And that is the Paramatma Chaitanyam, the consciousness of Paramatman. They're one and the same thing. So we can understand Paramatman to be consciousness. And that consciousness, being the self, is symbolized in the sun. So we have a couple more verses about Brahman being one with this entire world. But we'll move on to those next week. And today I wanted to leave some time to answer some of the questions that have piled up. So there are, I don't know if I'll be able to cover all of them. We'll start where we left off. How can I improve on forbearance, which is one of the qualities, the six virtues in the sadhana chatushtaya? This person obviously went back and reviewed. While there are excellent scriptural references on how to improve discernment and detachment, the only reference I came across for forbearance is it takes a long time to develop. Well, you just pray to God, give me patience right now. Right? You've heard that joke, I'm sure. Well, if you don't like the explanation, takes time to develop, then you're probably not going to ever develop forbearance. You have to accept the fact that it's going to take time, because that is the definitions of forbearance. Is not just patience, but it is founded on patience. We need patience, and it's a combination of patience and selflessness. That's what forbearance is. Is the accumulation of sadhana one does over a period of time is it that? No, I would say not. It's a slow process of training the mind. That's what I feel. I mean, not that I have mastered it or perfected it. So ways that you can, it's like, you kind of have to, what do you call that? You flush the beast out of the brush. And then you can actually take aim and try to slay the negativities we have, for a kind of a caveman metaphor there. But it means that you have to bring that thing out, because we're not aware of these things that are preventing us from developing forbearance. So, for example, if you fast, at least skip one meal, skip 2 meals, skip a whole day, skip several days, you start off small. Even fasting can also be construed to mean avoiding some favorite food that you typically have all the time. You can say, today I'm not going to have this because that's my favorite and I know it and I always like to have it, but I'm not going to have it today. I'm still going to have a full meal. So whatever your mind is willing to accept, you start with that. And then once that becomes like second nature, then you can say, okay, now I'm moving on. I'm going to say, no, I'm going to skip a whole meal, but I'll let myself drink juice. And then when that becomes easy, then you just stop drinking juice and you make it water. Like that. Everything, there's a gradual, everything is gradual. There's no sudden thing like that in spirituality, because we gradually developed all the negative tendencies. So how are we going to get rid of them all at once? Same thing with silence. You don't start by saying, I'm not going to talk to anybody at all for a month. You try to maintain silence during these retreats that we have, but when you have to talk, you talk. Do it for a day, do it for 2 days, do it for 3 days, a week, like that. Slowly increase it. That's what Amma says. Otherwise, what happens is if you fail, you start to, criticize yourself, and then you think, oh, I'm no good, and you might even give up. So you have to identify your own weaknesses and like very candidly, and take small vows based on those, and then slowly increase. And then you will find yourself becoming stronger and stronger. Forbearance is a strength. It's an inner strength. And just like any physical strength, there's a muscle that accounts for that. And you have to develop those muscles. Right now, our inner muscles are all atrophied, because we don't use them. We don't use the muscle of forbearance. We don't use the muscle of patience. We don't use the muscle of compassion. You have to start using them. But you don't go for 500 pounds all at once, right? You start a little bit, a light dumbbell, and you slowly increase it. You can't see the muscle, but it's there. The heart's a muscle, right? So it's like that. It's like the heart muscles. Have any of Amma's Swamis or Swaminis reached moksha yet? Don't think about that. Sorry, I shouldn't be so blunt. They're referring to this one person who's a well-known spiritual figure was talking about his awakening on some TV show. Okay, fine. Do you think Amma's ever going to say on TV like, oh, this is what it was like? She's not going to say that. It's really easy to talk about moksha. I talk about it too much here just because I'm trying to explain the concepts in the Gita. But it is much harder to attain it. In fact, in the scriptures, it says that one who talks about it a lot has not reached. So I'm just proving how little I have attained by talking about it so much. The realized one will never claim being liberated. So you're not going to corner Amma and get her to say that. It may come out of her mouth in some indirect way on an off-guard moment. So, but only like that. We cannot tell just by listening to them or just reading something they've written. You don't know. You have to see how they respond to circumstances. But in the end, it doesn't matter who has attained it. You should just be looking at your own shortcomings on how to transcend them so that you can attain moksha. Whether somebody else has attained it doesn't matter. Some people have asked Amma, I think like, what is that person? Why is that person doing such and so? Amma says that doesn't matter. You should understand why you are doing different things and how you can stop, doing the things you want to stop. I found from the theory of karma that the karma in one's sanchita bucket, it means the sum total of our karma, can force us to have non-human births if that converts to prarabdha. In other words, you have a big, gigantic, like let's say you have a loan that you took, and $1 million. And each lifetime you're paying back $100,000. So the prarabdha karma for this lifetime is that $100,000. But your total karma is the $1 million. You can't pay back, $1 million all at once. So you are, it's like paying little bits and pieces. So he's referring to that total karma and then the karma for this lifetime. I heard a story of Lord Indra who was born as a pig for doing some bad karma. Since a human birth is needed for spiritual practices, should I focus on improving my quality of sadhana and surrender to God to at least get a human birth in the future in order to continue the sadhana? Okay. This ties in nicely with that verse that we heard a moment ago. Doing sadhana alone is not a key. It's not a guarantee that we're going to advance, because we may be doing it with ego, we may be doing it just on the intellectual level or something like that. So it's always the blind spots that are the greatest obstacles in spiritual growth. They say, what is it? The chain is only as powerful as the weakest link. So like that, our spiritual growth, it's not about all the things that we can do really well. Let's say you can meditate for long hours. That's great, but it's those blind spots, those things that we don't want to look at because we're not very good at them or we're not quite sure how to deal with them. Those are the things that are going to keep us down. And those negativities are what are going to create bad karma or negative karma for us, and that will, compromise our next birth. So I feel that those are the greatest obstacles in the spiritual path. And whatever makes you angry, whatever makes you afraid, whatever makes you jealous or proud, these are all hints about where you really need to focus in your sadhana. It's not just, I read this scripture and I have to read that scripture. That's not necessarily going to help you, because you're going to stuff your head. If it's easy for you, then you're going to stuff your head with intellectual knowledge and then feel proud. So what you really have to do is you have to face the weakest links in your sadhana. And you have to diffuse all those time bombs in order to progress, but that can be a kind of a painful process. It means like rewiring the mind. I remember feeling severe mental pain when I was trying to learn Malayalam initially. Just trying to wrap my head around the pronunciation and the grammar and everything. One summer I was doing it intensely, and it just became so painful in my mind. And then I realized that that's not just for a language, it's for any kind of tendency, because English is so ingrained in my mind. I had also learned Japanese, but that's not Malayalam. Malayalam is its own thing. So English is my mother tongue, and it's so hard to uproot that and replace that with Malayalam. It was painful. So like that, uprooting the negative tendencies and replacing them with positive ones can be painful, but we cannot run away from that pain. Otherwise, that's like spiritual death, really. You're condemning yourself to a spiritual death sentence. A woman named Leslie requested the link for the live streams. I hope you got it. If you didn't, you can send your email again. If you do request it, you please include your name and phone number, your WhatsApp number, and your email address, which we should have. No, we won't get it on the form, so you have to send that in the message. Thanks. One last question before we conclude. Amma says not to run after the shiny, glittery shells of the world. She also reminds during the white flower meditation to keep our focus. However, for me, I do not feel like I'm looking for those shiny things, but I do have subtle desires, and they're harder to see as they're more subtle. Good point. And when my mind loses its focus in meditation, I find myself planning my seva and other things that I need to do later in the day, or thinking of a conversation I had the day before, etc. Please give some insight to catch those thoughts and subtle desires and stay in the present. Very good question. Well, even though I'm just talking about the shiny objects of the world, we should consider that whatever distracts our concentration, it doesn't have to be, jewelry or like a new car or a new house or a new partner or something like that. It's, I'm just talking about whatever is distracting your concentration. That's all it is. It's really about our vasanas. And because that is what hijacks our focus when we try to meditate. It's like a hijacking, really. When you lose focus, you can do what Amma says, but in, not with a lot of concentration. So you can try to, Amma has a, kind of guidance she tells us to talk to our mind. So you can talk to your mind, but do it in like a tailor-made way. And I'm going to give you an example. You say to your mind, why do you want to think about seva now? We had all day to think about it. Or we can do it after meditation. There's no benefit in doing it now because this time has been deliberately set aside for meditation. I mean, how would you like it if I started meditating when you're trying to do seva? Doesn't make any sense, right? So please allow me to focus on meditation now, and we can think about and talk about seva later, okay? So what happens, I find, is that the mind is not logical. The mind just feels and doubts. So when you give it a rational response, it doesn't have a rejoinder because there's nothing for it to say because it's only feeling things. And you already gave it a doggy biscuit saying, we're going to think about seva afterwards. So it'll be like, okay, fine. Shedi, like this, the bobbing the head, right? So, and by that time, you would have already objectified the urge to think about something else. And that might make it a little bit easier to return to the meditation. Should, hopefully. This is what came to mind for me. I hope that helps. You can try it and see what you feel. So we will conclude for today. We'll chant the first 2 mantras. And those who have time to join us, please do for a short meditation. And because some people might not stay until the end of the meditation, I'll mention that the bhajans this weekend will be Saturday, and there'll be a Krishna Jayanti and Kartika program together from DC. And Sunday night will be both San Ramon and here. And I do intend to have another Gita class a week from today. And that weekend is going to be very special because it'll be Vinayaka Chaturthi, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. That's 2 weeks from then. I'll talk about that next week. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Om Amriteshwari Namaha. Close your eyes and check your posture. Slow down the breathing process. Feeling the body and mind relaxing with each deep inhalation and exhalation. Try to feel Amma's subtle presence all around you. Feel as though you are in her arms, in her embrace. Try to feel her subtle presence within you as well. Slowing down the breathing process also slows down the mind and the flow of thoughts. And we can focus on the rhythmic flow of our breathing process. Focus your full attention and awareness on the peaceful flow of the breath with each inhalation and exhalation. As you feel, as you breathe in, now feel the subtle life force that flows in and out of the body through the vehicle of the breath. Even that life force is only nourishing on the subtle level. It is not the consciousness. The indweller of the body, the Jivatma, is what witnesses even that life force flowing in and out of the body. Remain as a witness to the body and the breath. Remain as the Jivatma that witnesses everything. That existed before this body and will continue to exist when this body is gone. Now let us conclude with one more prayer and try to maintain that feeling for as long as you can. Take a deep breath. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnaad Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om. One more long deep breath. And as you exhale, you can slowly open your eyes if you wish. Om Namah Shivaya. See you next time.